This presentation is on moral status. It's a general overview of the concept of moral status. It is designed to provide a context and a system for dealing with any situation where any moral dilemma where the moral status of some of the entities involved is debated. What we see is that there are a lot of political debates, like the abortion debate, debates over euthanasia for people in a permanently vegetative state, debates over animal rights, debates over the environment. All these debates have the same structure because they're dealing with the same kind of problem, the problem of the moral status of something. So hopefully this will give you some general purpose tools that will help you in all of these debates. We need to begin by defining our terms and defining them very carefully. I've already mentioned the general idea of moral status. Moral status is the standing of an object with regard to the duties owed directly to it. I want to expand this and emphasize a few points. This means that an object has moral status if you owe it something, or if you have duties to it. Another way of putting it is to say that something has moral status if it has rights. Sometimes people object to using the term rights to refer to all sorts of moral status. We'll set that aside. We'll just use this neutral term, moral status. If you owe it something, it has moral status. Now the important thing here is that these are direct duties. These are duties to the thing, directly to the thing with moral status. Let me give you an example to explain this. If someone broke into my house and smashed my television set, they would not have done a wrong to the television set. They would have done a wrong to me. This is because you do not have any direct duties to television sets. You have direct duties to people that indirectly involve their property. You have a direct duty to a person to respect their property. So you can say you're indirectly obligated not to smash a television set, but you have no direct duties to the television set. On the other hand, if you were to break into my house and kill me or kill a member of my family, if you were to kill my children, you would have wronged first and foremost my children. They are the person who are harmed. They are the people who are harmed. The wrong has been done to the child. Well, there are complicated cases that are sort of in between. If you broke into my house and killed my dog, have you wronged me because you messed up my property, or have you caused a harm to the dog, created a moral wrong against the dog? Another important part of moral status is that if something has moral status, events have to be able to be better or worse for that thing. You can't have duties directly to a thing unless things can be better or worse for it. Let me put it this way. If you hit my child, you have harmed my child, and that's because being hit is bad for a child. Well, if you smash a brick, are things really worse off for the brick? The brick certainly doesn't care. Things can't really be better or worse for a brick. It's just a brick. And that's tied up with the fact that you can't have duties directly to a brick. Okay. The other piece of vocabulary for moral status that we need to establish very quickly is the difference between persons and human beings. A lot of arguments, particularly over issues like abortion, are incredibly confused because people use the term person and human being interchangeably. We want to use them more precisely so that they're no longer interchangeable. A human being is a biological entity. Human being is a biological term. it refers to a member of the species Homo sapiens sapiens. Right? So you, me, a fetus, a person in a person in a persistent vegetative state are all human beings. We are all members of the same species. Person, on the other hand, is a moral term, and that refers to a creature with certain rights and responsibilities. Typically, a person is someone who has all of the rights and responsibilities that come with being a member of some community. And often personhood is taken to be the highest level of moral status. Now, you and I are persons. There are many things that are biologically human beings who may not be persons. An unborn fetus is not considered certainly prior to the third trimester, is not considered a person legally, and may not also be a person in a moral sense, even though biologically it is a human being. The flip side is also true. There may be things that are people in a moral sense, but are not biologically human. If you grant enough moral status to, say, an animal, like a chimpanzee, you might say that chimpanzee is close enough to us in all its capacities, its emotional life, that sort of thing, to get the status of being a person in a moral sense, even though it's not biologically human. There are a lot of other very sophisticated animals that people sometimes think might have the moral status of person. Dolphins, other members of the great ape family. Elephants. Another rich source of possible persons who are non-human is science fiction and technology. Right now we have not made a robot that can legitimately claim its own rights. But this is a possibility that's worth imagining, at least. We have plenty of movies where we depict robots as persons who demand their rights. Okay. The idea of moral status plays a particular role in moral theory. You can develop a theory of moral status, and this would be a smaller part of your moral theory in general. So you can imagine that you have a big moral theory that covers all sorts of moral topics, like autonomy and justice and naturalness. One topic it would cover would be moral status, and it would do that by having a separate theory, a sub-theory, that it would be your theory of moral status. If you want to develop a theory of moral status, you need to do three things. First, you need to specify which entities have moral status. And you may want to say that some entities have more moral status than others. So you would probably begin by saying that normal adult humans all have the moral status of persons. And you try and expand it from there. Do you want to expand it to include fetuses? Do you want to expand it to include animals? That sort of thing. When you decide to expand the circle, you need to specify what properties justify the expansion of the circle of personhood. Think of it this way. 200 years ago, women did not have the same moral status as men. And an argument had to be put forward to justify the idea that women and men were morally equal. For instance, women should be able to vote and own property and that sort of thing. This was done by appealing to the characteristics that men and women have in common. We all have the same emotion. We have similar emotions. We have similar interests. We have the same capacity to think and reason. The expansion of moral status from men to men and women was done mostly on the basis of mental properties. The emotional and rational makeup of creatures. And something similar happened when Europeans expanded their concept of moral status to include people from Africa, from other parts of the world, right? It was decided that all human beings were similar enough that they all deserved the same moral status. And so you have to specify what properties confer moral status. The final thing that you have to do to develop a theory of moral status is list the duties that you have to the creatures that have moral status. The easiest way to do this is to simply come up with a list of inalienable rights. Right? So we decide that all men and women of all races are created equal. They have the same moral status, the moral status of persons, and then we list the rights that they have, in the Constitution, for instance. Now, you may want to say that some kinds of creatures have moral status at a lower level than persons. One argument that's typically made is that animals have some moral status, but not the same moral status as human beings. And one way this can be expressed is by changing the list of duties that you have towards animals. You don't have the same duty towards animals that you have towards people. Some people, for instance, will assert that animals have a right not to suffer, but they do not have a right to life. So, you need a list of duties to the various creatures that have moral status, or conversely, a list of rights that come with different levels of moral status. Okay, candidates for moral status. This is just a big list. I'm not going to narrate this list. I'll just give you the chance to scroll through this. The important thing to note here is that I'm not claiming that any of these things have moral status. However, all of these things have been granted moral status by one group or person or another. That is, someone out there thinks that each one of these things has moral status. So I'll just let you look over this list. Okay, so that was a big list of things that might have moral status. Well, the next question is why? Why would someone think that any of these things have moral status? Why would someone think that a microbe, a virus, or a bacteria has moral status? Well, for each one of these, there are properties that we think that various people have thought to be morally significant that are possessed by the entity in question. Starting simply with life, there are plenty of people out there that think that if something is alive, simply alive, it has some kind of moral status. So if life brings moral status, then bacteria, insects, plants, all have moral status. That makes if you say that, then the world is pretty full of things with moral status. A slightly more restrictive view would be to grant moral status to creatures that have sentience. This is a term I will define in more detail later, but that's basically the ability to feel, particularly the ability to suffer. And if you believe that sentience brings moral status, you're going to be concerned with things like the rights of animals that are capable of feeling pain, that sort of thing. The other important mental property that might bring moral status is sapience. Sapience is a batch of higher cognitive abilities. Typically, it's only thought that normal adult human beings have sapience. This is the ability to use language, to reason, to be a moral agent. It may be the case, though, that other animals also qualify as sapient. Okay. So the first three are basically biological or mental properties. There are also relational properties that can bring moral status. For instance, you might say that something has moral status if you are in a caring relationship with it. Notice that this is a completely relativized notion of moral status. I have a caring relationship with my children, right? Therefore, they have moral status for me. But since I don't know your children, they don't have moral status for me. The care-based idea of moral status is interesting because it creates a very fragmented idea of moral status. Not everything has moral status for the same for different people. Being biologically human is another important idea that might bring moral status. Here, what you're essentially saying is that the biological category human is coextensive, covers all the same entities as the moral category of person. So if you believe that that something is a person because it is biologically human, you're going to believe things like full moral status is present at conception, and a human being retains full moral status even if they are in a permanent and irreversible vegetative state. Because in all these situations, the human being is still a member of the species, even though it has lost all mental functioning or has never gained mental functioning. Okay. There are also those who grant moral status to communities, and we saw this in the list earlier. There are plenty of things larger than a human being that might have moral status. Ecosystems, corporations, nations. If you believe that you have duties to your nation as a nation, you are giving the nation moral status. Well, why would you do that? Well, you could say that it's because it's your community. It's a community that you depend on. People make similar arguments for granting moral status to the natural world, to the global ecosystem. The idea is that it is a community that goes beyond the human community that we depend on for our existence, and thus nature as a whole has moral status. All right. Being beautiful or having other positive aesthetic qualities. This might seem superficial, but it happens. You know, maybe things are just more morally important if they bring beauty to the world. Finally, being loved by God. This would be a sort of what we would call a divine command theory of moral status. We could simply say that God tells us what we have duties to and what we don't have duties to, and we just simply listen to it, listen to God, right? And so God loves all his creatures, and we must love them too, something like that. All right, I want to go into more detail about the two vocabulary words from the previous slide, sentience and sapience. Sentience is the ability to feel pain or suffer. More broadly, it's the ability to have any kind of sensation. Really, there are a batch of mental properties that all work together. They really co-evolved to create a certain kind of functioning in an organism. So if you can feel or suffer, probably also are capable of developing beliefs about the world and desires. And so this is, I think of this sort of canonically as a dog's level of mental functioning. You know, a dog is sentient. A dog can suffer. A dog can feel. Dogs also have beliefs. They believe that the mailman is invading their territory. And they have desires. They desire the mailman to leave. Belief, desire, and sensation are a trio of mental properties that all come together to create a sentient creature. More sophisticated mental properties, though, come with sapience. Sapience is a set of abilities associated with higher intelligence. This includes things like self-awareness. You know, when a dog sees a mirror, it thinks there's another dog there, so it barks at the dog in the mirror. Human beings, dolphins, and chimpanzees are all capable of recognizing themselves in a mirror. What this means is that we have some rich sense of self-awareness. Human beings, at least, also use language. Chimps can be taught sign language up to about the level of a 3 or 4-year-old. But you know, human languages are very different than animal signaling systems, and the ability to use the incredibly sophisticated human languages is another aspect of sapience. The final aspect of sapience would be the ability to be a moral agent. We can hold a sapient creature responsible for its actions. So typically, if you think that any right must be accompanied by a responsibility, rights and responsibilities are always go hand in hand, you're only going to grant rights to sapient creatures, because only sapient creatures can be held responsible for what they do. Okay. Other things to emphasize here. Both sentience and sapience probably come in degrees, and it will be often ambiguous whether something has any of these either of these properties. It is difficult for me to decide, I've spent some time researching this, whether earthworms, for instance, are sentient. Do earthworms feel pain? Right now I'm leaning against it. We will look briefly in the abortion section of the issue of whether fetuses are sentient, or more precisely, at what stage in development does the fetus acquire sentience. It is, by the way, clear that the fetus is not sapient. It does not use language. It cannot be held responsible for its actions. Self-awareness is a little harder to judge. But babies, newborn babies, don't recognize themselves in the mirror. I think you have to be about a year to 18 months old before you recognize yourself in a mirror. One important thing to emphasize, especially when it comes to talking about abortion, is that some properties that bring moral status are actual and some are potential. And you can grant moral status on the basis of either of them. So people will say that a fetus has moral status because of its potential. And there what they really mean is that it is potentially sapient. Now people say this in sloppy ways sometimes. They say that it's potentially a person. Really what they're saying is that it is actually a person because it has the potential to have this mental capacity, sapience. On the other hand, you don't have to worry about potentiality at all if you want to talk about being a human being. The fetus is already a member of our species. And you don't need to worry about potentiality to say that it is actually human. So if you say that the moral status of the fetus comes from its actual properties, then you can say it is actually human, from the moment of conception. So in general, bear in mind that moral status might be granted to an entity based on properties that it has now or properties that it might have in the future. Okay. So what you do when you develop a theory of moral status is you identify the property that you think brings moral status, and then you use that to specify the entities which have that property, and then you say that those entities are the ones with rights. So here's a list of all the things that I said might have moral status previously. Suppose you said that moral status comes from being sentient, from being able to suffer. This is natural enough, you might say, that if something is capable of suffering, we have a duty not to inflict suffering upon it. And once we have a duty to it, then it has moral status. Well, what does this grant moral status to? Well, that means that many animals, especially near human animals, also fetuses, some fetuses, newborns, children, the insane, the senile, all have moral status. Also, a wide variety of creatures that we don't actually have to deal with might have moral status, including robots, androids, space aliens. If Neanderthals had survived, they would have moral status, sort of thing. On the other hand, if we use sentience as the standard for moral status, then things like embryos do not have moral status, nor do works of art, endangered species, the species as a whole, not the individuals that compose the species, or nations, right? The dead don't have moral status. The permanently comatose do not have moral status under this standard. Well, all this leads to the game of reflective equilibrium. Reflective equilibrium is a process that philosophers engage in, which attempts to balance rules against intuitions about individual cases in an effort to find the right rule. So when you're in this business of drawing red lines around things that might have moral status, you can you will find that you are including some things and excluding some things. And if you don't like what you have included or excluded, you're going to have to change your line. So if you don't believe in animal rights, then the sentience standard is including things that you don't like, right? The things that are included that you don't like get called counterexamples in this game of reflective equilibrium. You might try reducing the range of things that have moral status in order to get away from the counterexample that says animals have moral status. You could do this by embracing the sapience standard. But notice that when you do that, you not only exclude animals, you also exclude newborn babies. Well, no one wants to say that newborn babies have no moral status. That seems monstrous. So once again, the sapience standard has a counterexample. You can keep moving around. The biologically human standard looks good, but only if you don't believe in animal rights and you don't believe in abortion or euthanasia either. So it's a process of balancing your ideas about what standards are good against your intuitions about particular cases, like what should we do about animals or what should we do about fetuses. So this is a strict definition of the process of reflective equilibrium. It is a process of developing rules by balancing intuitions about particular cases against the rules that cover those cases. I already said that. Let's break that down slowly. Here's the method. You propose a definition. You say, something has moral status if it is biologically human. Then you look for counterexamples, things that are included that you don't think should be included, or things that are excluded that you think should be included. So if your proposed standard was the biologically human standard, you might be upset that you have excluded animals, or you might be upset that you have included embryos. Both of these would be counterexamples. once you have a counterexample, you're faced with a dilemma. You can go one of two ways. You can either revise your definition, change your rule, perhaps move from a biologically human standard to a sentience standard, or you can actually change your views about the individual cases. You might say, well, I guess I do just have to accept that even an embryo has rights. So you're always in a position to go one of two ways. You can either change your intuition about the case, or you can change the rule that you've been following. Now, the other thing you need to always do is be sure that your definition is plausibly and internally consistent. And that's going to be one thing that will actually motivate you to change your intuitions about individual cases. If you've got a definition, if you've got a rule that works well for you, it's believable and it's internally consistent, then you're going to want to stick with that rather than disrupt it just to keep your intuitions about individual cases. So this is the balance. You have a desire to stay with a consistent and plausible definition on the one hand, and on the other hand you've got intuitions about all sorts of other cases. And once you balance those out, you're in reflective equilibrium. Okay, so I'm not going to require you to know everything that has ever been thought of as a possible candidate for moral status or a possible reason why something might have moral status. But here are some of the more commonly debated things. Typically, the properties that are thought to bring moral status are sentience, sapience, and being biologically human. Those are the ones that come up most in bioethics debates. We also need to mention being loved by God, because religious motivations play an important role in bioethics debates. Also being a community one depends on. It's important. This is the standard justification for granting moral status to nations and to nature. And some of the entities that get debated. Fetuses in the abortion debate, animals in the animal rights debates, and ecosystems in the environmental debates. I want to end by cluing you into one key argument that comes up again and again in debates over moral status, and it comes up naturally because of the way the process of reflective equilibrium works. And this is the argument from marginal cases. It begins like this. Suppose we tried to deny animal rights by using sapience as a criterion for moral status. That is, we say, I don't think a pig has rights. I think it's perfectly okay for me to eat a pig. Pigs don't have rights because they don't vote, they don't think, they don't talk, they don't do the things that you or I do. Well, we would then, if you did that, you would also have to deny moral status to certain marginal humans. That is, you can find someone out there who is biologically human who doesn't do the things that pigs don't do. That is, has the same level of mental functioning as an animal. The permanently mentally retarded, right, may not be able to talk or vote or do all the higher cognitive things that we think are, that some people think are so important for moral status. But look, you'd really have to be a monster to say that the permanently mentally retarded have no moral status, right? Well, if you want to say that the permanently mentally retarded have moral status, then you also are blocked from denying animal rights by using sapience as a criterion for moral status. Basically, for every animal out there, you can find a human being that has the same level of sentience and sapience. And so if you try to use sentience and sapience to exclude the animal, you will also wind up excluding some human beings. And that is an unacceptable consequence for many people. Okay, thank you.